Welcome to another episode of Dress and Drinks, our webinar in our series Conversations on Dress. I'm Leon Weavers, the host. I'm a professor of costume design at Loyola Marymount University. I would love to welcome to Dress and Drinks our curator for today, Jonathan Walford. Jonathan is the Curatorial Director of the Fashion History Museum in Cambridge, Ontario. The museum has 10,000 objects from the 1600s until today, and the museum looks beyond the history of designs and dating to fashion's relevance in our societies, cultures, individual expression, and more. Born with an inherent fascination of what makes people tick and why we wear what we wear and what we think is beautiful, Walford is drawn to and has explored it all. Former freelancer as well as curator at the Bata Shoe Museum, he funnels earned wisdom and extensive experience into the Fashion History Museum. For a young collection, which was founded in 2004, it's impressive in its scope and quality. And with that, we welcome today Jonathan Walford from the Fashion History Museum. So, Jonathan, so excited to have you here. Another Canadian collection here on D&D. So great to have you.
It's sort of weird suddenly being on the show. I mean, I've seen a lot of these Dress and Drinks, so it's kind of fun to be on the other end of it now. So.
Excellent. We will put you through the paces.
Thanks for asking me to be here. That's great.
It's going to be a grilling this afternoon. I can feel it already.
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to say it's a bit weird talking about myself. Hang on. There we go. Because I don't really like talking about myself, but I have to talk about myself because I'm one of the founders of the Fashion History Museum. So I'm going to have to do that. The picture on the left is what I used to look like ages ago. My first job was, well, my first job was picking raspberries. That was another story. My second job was working for Heritage Village Museum in Burnaby, BC. And it was a restored village of sort. It was a kind of a mocked up village with a house attached to it and a few other little buildings. And I started off there as a volunteer and then eventually got a job there in the summertime and then got a couple more summers after that. And as a costume guide, they kind of threw a collarless shirt at me and said, here's your costume. And I thought, well, I can do better than that. So I started going to, this is 1977, 78, 79. So I started going down to the vintage clothing stores in Gastown and Vancouver, and I'd go to garage sales, stuff like that. And I found various things and started putting outfits together. I had 3 different posts. I worked in the kitchen of the 1920s house. I worked in the general store, and I also worked in the bank. So this is my banker outfit. So if you're wondering why, it's a bit pretentious, but anyway.
That's a very upscale kitchen outfit.
Well, there were days when I go dressed as a banker, and then I was told I was being switched to the kitchen. I felt like, oh, okay. So I'll often come to spats. I'm gonna go the apron. You know, there are ways of making it work. So anyway, that was sort of my introduction into the museum field, and from there, I started working in a local museum in North Vancouver as a display coordinator, doing their exhibitions. And in 1984, I met my partner in life and also partner in the museum, Ken Norman, and that's a picture of us in the late 90s in our basement with the collection, just to sort of show you how it was already getting out of hand by that point. So we're the two that basically started this whole thing. One thing I did was I collected vintage clothing, because when I was looking for the stuff for me to wear, I was finding other things in the stores as well. So the very first thing I bought that wasn't for me to wear was a black net dress from the 1890s. And I started doing presentations in the 80s and 90s, right up to like 2002 or 3, I think was the last time I did a show with friends, and we would dress them up in various periods, and we'd do a history of fashion from the turn of the century to the 1980s. I called it Propriety to Punk. And so we would start with the dressing sequence, the Edwardian dressing sequence with the corset and that kind of stuff, and work our way through the various decades up to, in this case, Cyndi Lauper, but we also did punk and Madonna, all sorts of different kind of looks.
Nice.
And it was a very popular show, and this is kind of the day. I mean, a lot of people are doing this now. You go on to YouTube or whatever, and all people presenting these histories of fashion, but I was a pioneer. We were doing this without the reproductions that were available to us nowadays. I know there's some people out there going, "Oh my God, he wore real, they used real clothes in these things." We did, but it was my collection. I purchased it for that purpose, and I have to say I am surprised by the lack of damage that happened. I think we lost a pair of shoes and a pair of earrings, about 4 or 5 pairs of stockings. There was lipstick on my evening dress, which is a problem. and one model stole a pair of earrings as well, but that's another story. But mostly, I was quite surprised how well things survived. I tended to stick to cotton dresses and wool suits. That's the safest thing. They could be cleaned and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I did something that was more fragile, I would do it more early, like the sort of the Diana Ross beaded dress up there. That would be sort of the 60s stuff. So I wasn't doing that. I wasn't showing the really good early stuff, the evening gowns and things like that. But anyway, it was a very popular thing to do, and that's how I built a collection. I then started working in various museums. When I moved to Toronto from Vancouver in 1985, and worked at a couple of municipal museums. And then I kept writing letters to Sonia Bata, saying, you know, I'm looking for a job in the museum, textile field, fashion field. And she had the Shoe Museum, which wasn't open to the public yet. It was a private collection that was in the basement of the Bata headquarters. And eventually she wrote me back after, I think, 3 letters. So she asked me to come in for an interview. And she had all 3 letters in front of her, which like, oh my God, I hope I didn't lie in one of them. But actually all 3, I think they were okay. I can't remember if I changed any word, but anyway. So she hired me, and I worked there for 11 and a half years. I was there until the end of the 90s. And I started off as the assistant curator and worked to curator. And there was all sorts of exhibitions that we did. I'm only going to show you a couple of pictures, partly because I didn't take pictures. This was before camera phones, right? So you take a roll of film and half will come back and be blurry. So I don't actually have a lot of good photographs of the early exhibitions, but a couple that I do. We did a fashion staircase in the main gallery, which it was there from '95 when the museum opened, and they took it out in 2003 and it started doing images instead, like large photographic panels instead. And then in '95, the opening exhibition that we did in the fashion gallery was the Gentle Step, which was all 19th century footwear. And we created kind of a village using these flat panels with printed facades. And there was a church and a store and a theater and a parlor and a ballroom. And I can't remember what else there was. But anyway, it was actually a very effective way of showing clothes and shoes together, because you could get quite close to the windows to see the shoes that were either on display or whatever. But the clothes were generally more screened, like they're behind like a scrim or something, so they weren't the focus of the exhibition. So it worked out quite well, and it was I think a fun exhibition and was quite successful. I left Bata in '99. I burned a bridge in the process, but anyway, well, that's another story.
Yeah, lots of stories.
I'll tell you off camera. So I started working on as a freelance curator, and I started doing exhibitions for the museums, and I also started doing a lot of buying and selling on eBay. And this is in the day when it was amazing what you could still find. It was still out there. So these are all things which I bought and sold on eBay. So they're not in the collection. And it's kind of a shame. There's some really great things. The English blue silk shoes from the 1780s. Those actually went to the Bata Shoe Museum. The red shoes were from, I think, Connecticut, and they actually had a wedding date, 1756 in them. Those also went to Bata. The Nottingham lace shawl, I can't remember who bought that. And the other 2 pieces were, I bought those in upstate New York, and they came together, so they probably were from the same source. You know how hard it is to find men's stuff that's early, that's in good condition. I just like, I can't believe I got rid of that piece. But, you know, we make mistakes and we move on and we learn, hopefully. So, but in the process of doing this, we started noticing that things started getting harder to find. And the museum field was really changing right around the turn of the century. And these are just some things that came to mind as I was thinking about putting this presentation together. So the MoMU in Belgium opened in 2002. And the Fashion and Textile Museum in London, Xander Rhodes, opened that in 2003. And you started watching the Oscars, and the celebrities started wearing vintage fashions, like Renee Zellweger, who wore Dessay in 2001. And of course, there was the Carrie Bradshaw, who was wearing vintage in the early years of the Sex and the City. In fact, the outfit that she's wearing there, the coat is actually a 20s coat that had a rabbit fur collar and cuffs, and Patricia Field bought it from me and put it into that episode. It's the one where Miranda gives birth. So in case if you want to see it close up or see more of it, that's the episode where it's in. She wore it just recently too in the thing, the new thing that's on. Anyway, and then also fashion exhibitions started changing, and you know, Harold Coda and Richard Martin were doing some important things in the 90s, but something happened around the turn of the century where suddenly the fashion exhibitions, I think it was the Met, I think we really brought attention to it, and the red carpet balls, that kind of stuff. And suddenly other museums are kind of going, oh, maybe we should do one too. And When I started selling things on eBay, I was also probably the biggest buyer on eBay. And by 2004, I would say I wasn't buying anything on eBay anymore because it was going too expensive. And there was, Kevin Jones from Fitum and Hamish Bowles. They were buying my stuff or they were sniping me. So I thought, this isn't working. This isn't sustainable. This isn't a job that's going to keep going. So that's when we decided to start the Fashion History Museum. And one of the first things we started doing was creating exhibitions using the collection that we had, and also writing books to accompany them. So I got a deal with Thames Hudson to write some books while I was doing these exhibitions. The most popular ones were Wardrobe, which was all 1940s fashions from the collection. They didn't want to do the book on war fashion, though. They call it 40s fashion. It's really about fashion during World War II. But anyway, they didn't want to have war on the title. Ready to Tear, that was actually a self-published book on paper dresses. We have a lot of paper dresses. I love paper dresses. I think it has 60 of them in the collection. We're missing a few major ones, but if anyone has the rocket ship paper dress and they want to get rid of it for not much money, call me. It's what I'm missing. And then the shoe collection is good too. I mean, you can take the boy out of the shoe museum, but you can't take the shoe museum out of the boy. So I have I've acquired a really good shoe collection for the museum, and that's was something else that we decided to turn into a traveling show as well.
And are these books available to purchase from somewhere?
Ready to Tear is available at our gift shop. I
Can
think
we
I
tell you through
think they're
Walmart?
all available through Amazon if you go look for them. Yeah.
Okay.
There's other ones too. There's a 50s one and another shoe book, a couple of things too. But those are the three biggest ones, which I did. And yeah, I believe they're all available.
Or we could call your gift shop directly.
You could. They're also available at the Museum of Design in New York, one in Columbus Circle. They have them. They're carrying them right now in their gift shop too. So if you live in New York, you can just pick one up there. So they've ordered 3 boxes of them from me. So anyway, those are the 3 biggest shows that we were doing with the books. Then after we became a museum in 2004, the previous ones were done first of all as kind of a commercial enterprise, and then once we became a museum, we decided we wanted to create exhibitions as a fashion history museum. So my collection became the seed collection for the museum, and that's what built our reputation because my collection could then be used to promote the museum. And one of the first ones we did was an exhibition called 12-12-12, and it was fashion in 1812, 1912, and 2012. And it wasn't a lot of it was not just fashion, but actually life in 1812, 1912, and 2012. So it was celebrity gossip and 1812 log war of 1812 stuff and Napoleon, that kind of thing. And then in 1912, of course, lots of Titanic and that story. 2012 turned out to be one of the most boring years in news history. I know from our perspective today, the thought of a boring year in news is a lovely idea. But in 2012, the most exciting thing that happened, I think, was that Italian ocean liner that fell over and hit a rock and went on its side or whatever. That was about the biggest news story of the year. 2012 wasn't particularly interesting, but 1812 and 1912 were fascinating. And of course, not only that, but they were 100 years apart, but the silhouettes weren't that far apart either. So it was kind of interesting to compare a century apart, totally different news, and yet a similar kind of aesthetic in 2 decades. For 2012, we showed it in a runway style with matching blonde wigs. We didn't have a lot of money, so most of the clothes we purchased brand new. There's like Jason Wu for Target. There's Material Girl, which is Madonna's daughter. She came out with that collection that year. But the best dress is probably the Desiguale, which is the second one from the left. That's probably the best one that we had. But anyway, it was kind of a fun way, I think, to present the fashion, contemporary fashion. And we also do this sort of runway thing, and we have the chairs set up with little signs that says, reserved for Anna Wintour, reserved for Hamish Bowles, that kind of thing. So it was fun. Other exhibitions that we did included waste management, which was our corset and crinoline and all those sort of collections. It was a small exhibition, but it went around to, 4 or 5 museums took it. They were really excited about having it. And then we got the opportunity to have a site for 6 months in the town of Galt, which is where I'm from. Cambridge is a modern city that was created in 1973 from the combination of basically 3 other small towns, Hesper, Preston, and Galt. So Galt was the biggest of the 3, and it was a very industrial city. And the reason why we came to here, I should mention, and that is that the museum we founded in 2004, and then we couldn't figure out where we should go. We founded it as a charitable nonprofit national museum, so we go anywhere in Canada. Oddly enough, I think the first interest that we got was actually from someone in San Francisco. They wanted us to. They were thinking about doing some sort of attraction at the Presidio and down there. And they asked if we'd be interested, and we said, no, we want to stay in Canada, thank you very much. But it was nice to be asked. So we started where we go in Canada, and I'm originally from the West Coast, and that didn't appeal to me to go back. You can't go home. The prairies I'm not living in, forget it. The north I'm not living in, forget it. I don't speak French well enough, so Quebec's out of the question. And I have no history or connection with the East Coast. It's a lovely place to visit, but it doesn't mean anything to me. So it's Ontario. So then within Ontario, what do we look at? We went to Toronto, and there's an attraction in Toronto called Casa Loma, which is this big monster house that was built in 1912, 14, something like that. And the guy who built it was this, massively wealthy industrialist. Lived there for about 10 years, lost all his money, and ever since then it's been kind of an albatross. But it's useful for weddings and dances and stuff like that. So they have all these rooms on the upper floors that we had thought they might be interested in turning into a museum. And we had a couple of meetings with them, but it kept falling through. So that wasn't going to happen. We thought of Niagara Falls, and then we thought, no, that's not the right type of tourist market. That's not arts and culture. That's people who want, different things. So we came to Cambridge because this was the industrial center of Canada, early Canada in the 1850s and 60s. And a lot of the woolen mills and the even silk mills were here, located here in this area. So we were important for fashion, not for the production of fashion necessarily, but for the basics, the textiles, underwear, shoes, children's wear, that kind of thing. So it seemed like a good location to come, a bit like Lowell, Massachusetts, or maybe St. Louis, that kind of thing. With that kind of level of it wasn't New York by any means. That's Toronto. So anyway, that's why we chose this area, and it's also a big Scottish area. So that we thought our first exhibition should be called Paisley and Plaid. That led to another exhibition in the nearby regional museum we called Street Style, which was highlights of the collection that coincided with the political boundaries of the region between 1853 and 1873, and comparing fashion with architecture. So you're looking at Gothic, you're looking at Art Nouveau, you're looking at internationalism, all that kind of stuff. So that was the inspiration to go through this particular exhibition. So this is from the oldest looking up, and this is from the newest looking back. Well, not quite, the 70s just off to the right here. But this shows you some of the things that we all showed that were in relation to the architecture. So that show was actually quite a hit. We had like 24,000 people see it. And that ensured us that this was a good location for the museum. So we found a location, and it was a former post office in the town of Hespeler, just off the major highway 401, so we knew it was easy access. So there's lots of good things to say about it. The building was a wreck on the inside. It had been the post office sorting station, the area we were looking at there in the picture. It also had been a floral ranger and a restaurant and a whole bunch of other things too. A call service. So there was like telephone wires everywhere. So between November of 2014 and June 2015, we turned it into a museum. And our first exhibition was called Back to the 80s. We did that because the building had a broken clock tower. And also the date that they go to in the future and Back to the 80s is October 2015. So we thought, well, that'd be really fun. So we decided to play up on the 80s thing, and we did this whole sort of 80s theme exhibition. I don't think anybody got it except us, but we thought it was cute. So we had,
you tell me you had a DeLorean?
Sorry?
Did you have a DeLorean out front waiting for that?
That would been lovely. Yeah, no, unfortunately not. It's basically two big galleries. There's one big gallery and then a slightly smaller gallery at the front, which used to be the entrance to the museum, or to the post office. And where the front counter had been, we turned that into a large glass wall. So it created a built-in case. And we didn't quite know what was going to work to the general public, what would appeal to them. So we kept playing with different exhibitions. And one of the first things we did was this exhibition called Barbie's Boyfriend Ken. I thought that was appropriate considering Barbie's so huge right now. So this is all from a collector that a friend of ours, he collects Ken, but only between 1961 and 67. That's the original Ken. Once you get to 68, he's all beefed up and then it's a different Ken. So this is this is the Mad Men Ken. So these are all, he had every outfit ever made for Ken between 61 and 67. So it's really the sort of microcosm of men's fashion from that year period. And I thought it was a really great exhibition. It was fun. It did bring families and kids in, so that was kind of an interesting experiment.
Is there seriously a Ken in like Shakespearean dress and like?
That's one of the dress up.
Pumpkin hose.
Yeah, masquerade. So there's a knight, there's Aladdin, and then there's this, I don't know, Prince Charming, I think it is.
See, now, if that Ken was on the market when I was a child, I would have purchased that Ken.
Well, having seen the movie, I had a Ricky, and Ricky wasn't even in the Barbie movie, so that's how rare he was.
See, yeah.
So another thing we tried was some art installations. This was Angela Braham, who was completing her doctorate in the cruise in New Orleans, and the female cruise. This is a new idea. I had no idea. I didn't know about this, but apparently the cruise is it's a male thing. But this is a recent thing of women having these cruises, and they throw shoes from their floats or whatever. So she's been collecting these and doing research on the cruise, the female cruise. It was really popular. People actually drove up from New Orleans to see it. I was really surprised. We had several people come up, and because it was shoes and it was fun. My warning is never allow glitter in the gallery. Huge mistake. This exhibition was done about 3 months after we had opened, and up until we changed the carpeting last year, we were still vacuuming up glitter. So it's evil and should never in the gallery. It's the worst thing possible.
It is the herpes of the craft world.
It is. That's exactly what it is. So then we did an expected exhibition. We did wedding wear. We have, like every museum, we've got lots of wedding dresses, and it seemed like an appropriate time to show them. I was worried about everything being kind of, off-white, so we broke it with the red petals from roses, which I thought was kind of a good idea. It was popular. Then we did an exhibition on Pat McDonough, who was a Canadian designer. She was English born. She came to Canada in 1967, and she opened a boutique called The Establishment. And then the building that she was in was torn down, and she had to move. So she reopened, and she called that The Re-Establishment. And like many of the boutique owners at the time, like Betsy Johnson, for example, and Mary Quant, that kind of stuff, they were ripped off. So they would produce these cute, cheap and chic fun things for young women. But then the manufacturer would come in, the junior manufacturer would come in, buy things and just knock it off. So eventually she went into production as a designer. And so what we had was a retrospective of her collection we were given her archives and some clothes that came from her estate. Something she sold a lot of things off before she died, so I had some of the more glamorous things. But we had some pretty interesting things. The most successful piece ever was this grouping in the bottom right-hand corner called the Weekender collection. You would buy the windbreaker, was zipped into like a purse kind of thing, and it had all the various garments like stuffed into it. And then you could go away for the weekend, theoretically, with just the contents of that. And you had everything you could possibly want for, sailing, dinner, dancing, bikini, for all that kind of stuff. It was really popular, particularly in Germany. It was very popular in Germany. In fact, it was so popular that she couldn't keep up with production, so she sold it off. And a German company bought it out, and anyway, that was sort of her biggest thing that she ever produced. But she died in 2012, and what was interesting is that I guess unless you're Dior or Yves Saint Laurent or Chanel, if you're only as good as your last collection. And we found nobody knew who Pat McDonough was, which was really surprising to us. We thought that people were very familiar with her name in Canadian fashion, but no, not particularly. So that was a bit of a surprise.
I love that jumpsuit, though. Is that a jumpsuit, the purple one?
No,
Stunning.
it's not. It's a pantsuit.
Oh, that's a suit. And the one next to it, what is that print? Wow.
Yeah, it's M's for McDonough, her name. Yeah. The best one actually is, if you see the dark green jacket, that's made from garbage bags. So she had a mission from GLAAD to create a collection. So she created a bathing suit, a raincoat, a jacket, and something else, about 4 things. And we have the jacket. We don't have anything else, but we have the jacket. So it's like garbage bags. But it's interesting. She was all over the place. She did the high-end sort of couture ball gowns for Toronto socialites, and she did like funky things like GLAAD garbage bag jackets. So she's kind of all over the place. The next thing we tried was an exhibition about fur, feathers, ivory, whalebone, everything that we thought. We were trying to get attention. I was really hoping somebody would throw blood on the door. I was really hoping for it. Nobody did that. The only pushback we got was our MP didn't want to open the exhibition because she was also the Minister of Natural Resources. So she felt it would be a bad thing for her to open. But that was the only pushback we got. Otherwise, people loved the show. But basically, Canada, we were founded on fur. The beaver is what made us famous. So that was what we wanted to talk about, was the history of fur and its use in fashion. and also what it has endangered and what has been preserved, that kind of thing. So it really was actually a green exhibition. But I was hoping someone would take it the wrong way and turn it into an event, but they didn't, unfortunately. So we got very little publicity for it.
And sadly, there are no emoticons in GoToMeeting, so I can't even like throw a tomato at you right now. But those are amazing. Are all of those are all in you have this huge collection. I mean, those
It is a
furs
good
are
collection.
incredible. What is
Yeah,
the
no, we
one,
do have a good collection.
what is the coat like second from the left? Is that
Sealskin.
giraffe? What
The
is
sort of
that?
the one with sort of the brownie bottled one.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
sort of
on the
brown
left,
mottled
the
one.
raccoon coat, and the next one is a sealskin coat.
Oh, it's sealskin. Oh,
Yeah,
wow, that's
great
amazing.
seal. Yeah, I don't think you get too much in the States. It's more popular up here.
Hmm, that's
Or was
beautiful.
In 2017, we were the first of many museums to do an exhibition about Dior. However, we talked about his business rather than the design of Dior. We don't have the glamorous gowns that the Met or the V&A or Paris has. So we talked more about the business. And I think perhaps even more importantly than he as a designer, I think as a businessman, he was phenomenal. He really knew how to sell clothes. And so we had what we have in our collection. This is pretty much everything we have in our collection is Dior. We did have one from the 1948 collection, which is the right-hand side, and then going to the left. So we have Holt Renfrew Dior, Christian Dior, New York Dior. We have Yves Saint Laurent for Dior, right up to Marc Bohan. And it was a popular show, worked quite well. I thought it was interesting that all the other exhibitions really talked about the artistry or the designs of Dior, and we just kind of picked up on the business out of necessity, but I think it was actually a good angle to take. Then we found that Jane Austen and Regency is a license to print money. This is probably one of our most famous, or certainly most popular exhibitions. Again, you're kind of looking at everything we have that's Regency on display at the same time. But this was to honor, she died in 1817, so this was 2017. So we did this as a 200th anniversary of her death. And it was during her writing career. So it was all 1792 to 1817. And we did borrow one dress from another museum on the right-hand side, the red one. Unfortunately, that's not ours, but we borrowed that, but otherwise everything here is ours. It was a very popular exhibition. We had a good array of children's and adults, of day wear, of evening wear, Canadian examples, English examples. So it was a very popular exhibition. So popular that the paper bonnet that we have, which you can see in the middle there, that's the real one. We did a workshop on recreating it using Anaglypta wallpaper, which is that sort of that textured wallpaper. So it was, we varnished it, and it was a 2-day process to make the bonnet, but I think the final product was actually very, very convincing and very good. And we had to repeat the workshop again because it was so popular. Then also the big exhibition that we did in the main room was for the sesquicentennial of Canada. And we've approached it, actually, first of all, the poster got a lot of attention. We wanted to turn it into banners for the street signs, and city council said no. They thought it was offensive, so oh well. But funnily enough, Michelangelo's David actually was originally commissioned by the wool industry in Milan. So there's a fashion connection there too. So there you go. Anyway, other than the stereotypical Canadian stuff like parkas and Hudson's Bay blankets and Cowichan sweaters and that kind of thing, we also did look at Canadian fashion, and including Canadian fashion designers like Arnold Scazi and Marilyn Brooks and whoever else is in there.
Wow. So that turquoise dress in the front, like, who is that? That's fantastic. What is that sequin? Is it lace sequin overlay? What is that?
Yeah, it's like basically a sheath dress, and then he's overdone that. Overdone it. He's done these pearl lines and then filled in with ruffles. So it's I wouldn't say it's the best taste. It's a bit sort of drag queen, but it is very what it is. I mean, he was known for doing Mother of the Bride dresses. I'm trying to remember his name. Is David? David Ray is his last name. Ray. He did a lot of Mother of the Bride dresses, and bridesmaids dresses. So those were probably his main business was in that, and he became basically a bridal designer. But
Yeah,
it's certainly
that Nehru jacket, that green Nehru jacket is. I'm a little bit lusting over that right now.
it's pretty fun, and we got that from the guy who originally wore it. It's from a Montreal manufacturer, no one particularly famous. but he wore it for his high school prom. He wore it for graduation. So not the medallion. He didn't have the original medallion. I found one that was pretty close to what he originally wore. But yeah, it's very Sonny Bono. The following year, 2018, we did an exhibition called 101 Tales of Fashion. It's just basically interesting stuff about fashion. So it was either interesting materials, designers, the story behind the fashion, all that kind of stuff. It was just interesting stories. And I think it worked out quite well. It certainly appealed to people who weren't into fashion just because the stories were so interesting. And then in 2019, we did our French exhibition. This one was very popular. We didn't want to talk about just couture. We wanted to talk about France as a source of fashion and how people think, oh, if it's made in France, it's got to be good. And that's kind of the approach that we took of the value of the French dress. And this is partly spurred on by our purchase of the Poiret coat, which we paid a huge amount of money for. It took us 2 years to raise the money for it. We had donors, we raised all that kind of stuff. But in the end, we have a beautiful coat in the collection, which is incredibly rare. It was offered to us by a dealer in North Carolina. And I was thinking about it because it was so much money. And then she said, well, the Met said they'd be interested. So I said, we'll buy it. that was the clinch the deal. We pulled all of our couture out and we looked at what we had that was made in France. And I was kind of surprised we had quite a good collection. So this array here, there's on the left is Alix, who became Madame Grey. The black dress with her next to it is Catherine Parel. She was one of the Russian designers that escaped Russia to go to Paris to become a designer. Balenciaga is the suit, and then the gray print is Jean Lavan. The rust wool suit is Madeleine Desroches. The black wool jersey is Jean Laforêt. The pinkish dress and hat is Jacques Fat. And then there's Balmain, the strapless. Then there's Raphael, who is the black velvet suit. Next up, the really early Pierre Cardin. And then the final gray one is Lavan and Castillo from about 57. So kind of interesting array. But yeah, I was quite surprised. We had a good collection pulled there. Then we also sold our shoes that were French, and we had a fun way of showing them because we found these little plexi boxes in IKEA, and they were like $12. So it was a fun way. The shoes barely fit, but it was kind of a fun way, I think, of showing the shoes close up, and we can safely show them without them being touched. Then while we had that exhibition on, we brought in Bob Haven, who is a master tambour bead worker. He's from Louisville, Kentucky. And he came up, and one of his dreams was to always recreate a 20s dress in a museum. So fortunately, our dream was to have someone recreate a 1920s dress in our museum. So it was a happy combination. So the real dress is the one in the middle there. It was too fragile to show. People in museums know what glass beaded on silk chiffon dresses love to do. And it's always the prettiest ones that fall apart the first. So we couldn't show it. We could only show it flat. But he took the measurements and he recreated it, and the color looks more off than it really is. The real dress is ever slightly more yellow than the tan one, but actually it's surprisingly similar. Had I do it over again, I would probably have to make the dress a little bit bigger because it's a little small, and we don't have really a mannequin that kind of works on it. But interesting things that, for example, if you look on the real dress, you've got these sort of vertical lines, the bugle beads on the right hand, the reproduction. It doesn't, because they're silver. Right, so the silver hasn't tarnished yet, so they're still glittering like they were new silver bugle beads, whereas the old ones have turned this sort of charming dark black, and we sort of think of that as being what the 20s dresses look like, but it's not what it would look like. It would look like the one on the right. So that was a really fun exercise. It took him 2 weeks to create the dress.
Oh wow!
And, I know, he's fast.
That's actually not that long. I was gonna say that's amazing.
Yeah, no, I was, and he actually said he could have done it faster too. But he had to talk to people. People come up and ask him questions and that kind of thing. So he said he could have knocked out in a week. So that's kind of surprising. Then everything came to a grinding halt. And like many museums, we collected masks in 2020. We went for the more novel ones. The one on the left, which is for people who are hard of hearing, which of course is incredibly stupid because as soon as you talk, it gets filled with moisture and you can't see the person's lips. The one on the middle is made by Canadian company Haute Couture, and it's using a West African fabric, of course, after the Floyd George. Everything, all the demonstrations were going on, a lot of people wearing West African textiles. And then on the right is a glamour one for evening wear. It actually lights up and changes color. So not many people were out and doing glamorous, but what I'm going to say something nice about COVID, because it gave us a chance to stop and just think and reassess. And it's something we hadn't had a chance to do. We were going at everything full tilt from the moment we started the museum in 2015 or 2014 when we got the building. So we needed time to stop and reassess, and that gave us that opportunity. I kind of regret having wasted the first 6 months because it kept saying, oh, just 2 more weeks, oh, 1 more week, or 1 more month kind of thing. And we thought we'd get back to normal. And of course, it never happened. We could have used that extra 6 months, but it did give us an opportunity to rethink. And we came back with an exhibition called 300 Years of Fashion, which is basically going to be a little bit of everything for everybody. Because up to this point, we've been creating exhibitions, changing everything over. And invariably, people come in and kind of go, oh, you don't have any of this on display. Oh, you don't have anything from the 20s on display. You don't have anything from 50s on display. And kind of like, oh, really? Like, we're a small museum. Like, we can't show everything. So we decided what we're going to do instead is create an exhibition called 300 Years of Fashion. And we'll have something from every period. And then we'll change those exhibitions on a regular, change the garments within the exhibition on a regular basis. So if you come once a year, you will see completely different garments than if you come, from the past year.
Oh, nice. How long will this be an ongoing exhibition then, or?
We're going to keep this as a permanent installation for now, and keep it going for quite some time. So I'm not quite sure how much longer, but I mean, I've got more to change out. The 18th century is a little thin, and I can't do too many changes in there. But we do have enough, certainly 19th and 20th century, to keep it going for quite some time. So, and also we have new lighting in the gallery too, that when there's nobody in the gallery, it shuts off, which means we can actually put a slightly higher light in the gallery when it's on, so you can see things better, which is great. But yeah, so I think we're going to go this way for quite some time. Now, we still have the other gallery to change, and we also have a special area where we do special exhibitions within that. So right now we're showing, I didn't put a slide of this here, but we're doing an exhibition about Cher right now, and it's from a collector in Ohio. I have 8 garments that were worn by Cher, designed by Bob Mackey. So that's sort of a special feature section within this exhibition that will change annually as well. But I think it's working quite well. We don't have anyone complaining about, oh, you don't have any of this from the period, or that's working quite well. One of the other things we do too is we collect contemporary garment as it happens, and this is where the Canadian part of our collection comes into play, because every year we will collect something that was either done by a Canadian designer, or it was made by a Canadian company, or it's a Canadian take on something which someone else is doing somewhere else. And just 3 examples here: the Canada Goose coat, which was like the hottest selling coat of 2013. An evening dress worn by Sophie Gregoire Trudeau when she went to Washington to have dinner with the Obamas. And that's the dress that she wore, a copy of the dress that she wore by Lucienne Matty. And then in 2021, we acquired this gender-neutral suit by Spencer Badu, who's a Toronto designer. What we loved about it in particular is that it's actually not from 2021, it's from 2020. And a lot of designers, what they did, they had all this stock left over from 2020. They just reissued it in 2021 because nobody was wearing new stuff other than yoga pants and sweatshirts. So that was, I think, a really good thing to have as an example of how fashion kind of came to a grinding halt and slowed down, and everything was just topsy-turvy, which makes sense because I remember when I was studying fashion originally, 1918, 1919, 1920, it's kind of a jumble. You're not quite sure what's happening. I think the same thing. They're just, things are so confused that fashion isn't a forefront in anyone's mind. So I thought that was interesting, and that's why we wanted to acquire it for the collection. We have to sometimes pay for these things, the small museums especially. Small manufacturers, I mean, like Canada Goose, they donated their coat. The other 2, we acquired them at wholesale. So we have to pay for that. And we raise money, and this is where a lot of people in museums kind of turn up their nose at us going, oh, they sell the collection. No, we don't sell the collection. That's the whole point. We sell what's not in the collection. So people will give us things all the time, and we'll say, I'm so sorry, this doesn't make our permanent collection. We already have 3 examples like it, or it doesn't fit our mandate or whatever. And I'll say, do you want to return, or can we use it to raise money for the growth and care of our collection? And 99.9% of the time, people say, yeah, no, go ahead. I just don't want it anymore. They don't want to throw it in the garbage. They want to find some home for it. So we have been very fortunate to have some really good donations come in, and every year we have money to. This is what started with the Poiré coat, is we had to raise money. So now we're actually raising $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year through vintage clothing sales. And that's what gives us the opportunity to buy things from young designers to enter the Fascination Museum collection, or to buy important things for the collection, like these. These are all things that we purchased with money that we've ill-gotten gains from things that people have given us. So the Poiré coat, a slab-soled shoe from the 17th century, a gentleman's suit of clothes that was originally made in 1787 and then remodeled in 1806. That's Van Hapken Records. A Dutch shoe done with micro embroidery, and then this French police from the 1820s. So really spectacular pieces, and these are not the sort of things that come in on donations when people clean out the attic. You know, you'll get as many mink stoles, rayon wedding dresses, and christening gowns or baby dresses that you could possibly ever want. But this stuff is just not, it's not thick on the ground. And this is the stuff that used to show up on eBay back in the 90s, but it's not anymore. And we need to acquire this for the collection. So this is the stuff that we're focusing on acquiring through purchases for the collection.
That pelisse is gorgeous. That's just, that
The
green
is amazing. It's totally amazing. Actually, all of these pieces are phenomenal. And
I mean, they're really, really, I mean, that man's sort of the ensemble is really fantastic.
What's really interesting about that is that was a wedding suit from 1787 that a man wore. He was married Kitty Nelson. Kitty Nelson was the sister of Admiral Lord Nelson. So when Admiral Lord Nelson died in 1806, he had the suit recut for his son who attended the funeral. And so it's been worn by two generations of the same man who was the brother-in-law and the nephew of Admiral Lord Nelson. So it's got a really cool story with it too.
And actually, just as a question around that suit, are the buttonholes functional or are they decorative?
All decorative. Well, not the ones on the vest, but the ones on the coat are all
all
decorative.
The ones on the coat. Because that's
actually, maybe the one at the top works. I'm trying to remember now. I don't think so. I think they're all decorative.
I mean, because that one, those buttonholes are enormous.
Yeah,
buttonholes are enormous. I mean, they're like I could put my hand through it.
Well, and also it's interesting too that the how we figured part of this whole story was that the man who originally wore in 1787 was a little stockier, but he married Kitty Nelson, who was tall and willowy like Admiral Nelson was, and that's who the son took after, was this tall. This is for a really tall, skinny guy. So it's been cut down. So there's that fabric to cut out of it to fit a younger gentleman who was tall and skinny. So yeah, and you can see where it took us a while to figure the whole story out, but it's really really cool. And then just finally, I wanted to point out that this is something we've introduced this year, and part of our mandate is to promote the sustainability of fashion. And we're very opposed to fast fashion. It doesn't mean we don't collect some of it, but we don't want to see more of it. We want to get back to an arts, a crafts level of artistry, and to buying proper clothes that are properly made that will last a long time, and buy quality and less of it. So we started a challenge called the Upcycling Challenge, and we asked sewists if they wanted to be a part of this. What they got was a mystery box of materials. They gave us some directions, like if they didn't want to work with denim or fur or something, we paid attention to them. And we had 16 people or 17 people apply. And these are the top 6 pieces that we've now acquired for the collection as kind of a capsule collection for going into the future with this. We're going to do this as an annual thing. The bottom right was a trench coat, like a Burberry knockoff trench coat that he turned into this suit. The bottom middle one is 3 pairs of denim jeans and 2 yards of printed fabric. The one on the left was a black leather jacket, some natural hide material, some fur. I can't remember what everything was in there. She turned that into that coat. And then the top right was kid gloves, zippers, the leopard fabric. She beaded the cat onto it. The beads were of her own. You were allowed to add some of your own materials. The one in the middle took a very sort of traditional approach, doing patchwork with embroidery, phenomenal work. And the one on the left, we gave her upholstery samples. She took the upholstery samples apart and rewove it. Like, who does that? That's insane. So she came out with this really, first it's a bit crooked on the mannequin, but beautiful workmanship. We thought it was the most fashioning of them all. and it's soft and it doesn't feel like upholstery fabric at all. So
Wait.
really
So
fun.
you literally pulled the yarns out of the upholstery samples, and then rewove them into into a new
Yeah,
textile. Fantastic.
I know.
Fantastic.
So she actually won Best in Show. We just thought that was too amazing to not honor her in that way. So, and we're going to do this again next year because we were blown away by what we got. We thought we might get a couple that were okay. It was like, oh my god, how do you choose which is the best one, because they're all so amazing. So I think that's everything.
One of my favorite kinds of handbags, or actually also the fur and leather section is a good one too, are my favorite kind of handbag are the alligator ones with the head of the alligator and the claws on it
Yeah,
from the
we got
50s.
two of those.
Everybody's always creeped out by them, but they're my favorite handbag. I'm just like, oh, I love
I find
those.
the football-shaped armadillo ones a bit strange. Those are a bit disturbing. It's
Yeah,
like
those
if
are
you
pretty.
up like a balloon.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Tell us more about the upcycling project.
Okay. We're going to do it again next year. I'm not quite. We're just got it. We learned a lot from our mistakes this year. We didn't quite sure what we're going to do or how it's going to happen. So we're sort of still kind of bashing out the rules. But we're asking, what we're going to do. We can still do it possibly as a mystery box. But we found the mystery box was sometimes unfair because people didn't get anything that they could really work with very comfortably, and they were really hoping for something and they got something completely different. It's kind of like, oh. But the rules were basically that you had to use, the majority had to be what we sent you. You could add some other things if you needed to, but we had to see what we sent you in the final product. And in this case, all of the sewists were from across Ontario. We're hoping to go national, maybe international. We would not turn that concept down. At the moment, we're not asking anyone to pay a fee to become one of the SOAs. We may do that in the future if it gets to be too popular, it gets out of hand, and maybe then make the prize like the monopoly pool at the end. Like when you land on free parking, if you win, then you get all the money. Anyway, we'll figure something like that out. But essentially, we ask for you to send examples of your work. We want to make sure we're not just giving this to amateurs who are just going to not do anything. We want to see some value in what we're producing here, because the whole point is to show how upcycling is good and how this works and how it saves the planet and saves our garbage, that kind of stuff. What else do you need to know? We're thinking of doing this like maybe in January, February. One thing we thought we might do next time is make it a little fairer by saying everyone has to take one period garment, like 1950s crinoline or 1960s dress or something like that, and something that's not any value, and take maybe a pound of fabric and then see what you can do out of that. Like we're going to try and make it more even for everybody so that it's fairer.
Right.
Yeah, we're working on that.
How do you manage the vintage sales?
I'm stepping away from it now, but I mean, we do the Toronto Vintage Clothing Sale in spring and fall when that happens. We also have pop-up shops, and this summer and last summer we had a pop-up shop near us called Encore Vintage. We have summer students working it. I require knowing everything goes there, that I want to make sure anything that we need for the museum goes there, but otherwise it's handled by them, and we do very well. So far this summer, I think we've made about $23,000 from the pop-up shop, which is great. That's totally amazing.
Nice, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great. What is behind or in the large glass case behind them?
What you're looking at is the back of this exhibition. So you see those
Gotcha.
panels? Yeah, that's
Mhm.
what you're looking there. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so it's just a divider. So you can, in some cases, we actually took the panels down, and we had, when we did the Made in France exhibition, we had all the 19th century stuff here, so you could actually see the fronts here, and you can see the backs of the dresses to the side, or vice versa. So a lot of people love that. They love seeing the backs and sides of dresses that aren't supposed to be seen. Museum curators don't love that because very often that's where you put the damage. If something is faded or torn or something like that, you turn that away and you lower the light levels, and everything looks better. We all look better in lower light, so it helps with the collection.
How do you select between paper hair, wigs, or bare heads for your
Oh
mannequins?
boy. Money, time. Yeah, I don't know. Generally, if I'm thinking with a neutral, like a white, a black, or a gray mannequin, I tend to stick with an artificial looking hair. So I used steel wool with gray mannequins once. I don't know how successful it was, but it was interesting. The white paper hair with the white mannequins, we've done that. We're shifting over the mannequins now, partly because of conversations that we've had about diversity, and that people will look at a white mannequin, even though white people aren't white, we're actually pinky yellow. They think white people when they look at white. And so I thought, okay, well, that's an interesting concept. We're going now with an array of skin tones. So we're going with every possible shade from cocoa to whatever. Um,
Right.
Unless the features of the mannequin are Caucasian. Well, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing blackface. My God. But if they're neutral, or if they're faceless, or just the body, then we will go with different shades. But yeah, so that's something we're experimenting. We're just in the process of shifting that over right now. We had a grant this year to repaint and update our mannequins, so that's what we're working on. But I can't tell you that there's a rule for it. I feel that if it's a flesh tone mannequin with faces, you got to go with hair. I think the white hair looks strange on it. I had a picture I pulled out because I used white. It was a mannequin with a face. Anyway, it didn't work. So anyway,
Right.
generally that's what I do. If it's white, I stick with paper. If it's flesh, I go with hair. And if it's bald, it's got to have a hat. Unless it's like a faceless thing, in which case that's neutral enough, right? If it's
Right.
just an orb, then it can
Right.
stay that way.
These days, where are you finding older pieces of clothing to add to your collection?
Well, I'm surprised so much walks in. I mean, we had COVID was great because a lot of people cleaned out their. I shouldn't say COVID's great, but during COVID, a lot of people cleaned out their attics and basements and bottom drawers, and we had some amazing stuff walk in. We had a really beautiful. It's on display this year actually, a 1980s wedding dress in blue taffeta with a removable train, worn in Scotland
Wow.
with a label. So that was a really cool object. So these things do exist. They're still out there. They're just thinner on the ground. You just don't find them like you used to, and that's why the really old stuff we go through dealers. And one hope right now is that a lot of people who collected back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s are dispersing their collections. They're downsizing, they're dying, whatever. And those
Right.
collections are coming up available, and sometimes they're going directly to museums, but sometimes they go into the open market.
Yeah.
So there are some good things showing up that way. It's
Uh,
hard to find.
yeah. No, it's becoming more and more difficult.
Yeah.
Do you ever do any displays in the US from your collection?
We have loaned to American museums. We have, I'm trying to think, have we? Yes. Well, we loaned our Lucille to the Titanic Museum in Pigeon Forge. That was great. I mean, we had something like, I don't know, 1.3 million people saw that dress. It was something insane. I can't remember how many it was, but it was a huge number of people saw that. Yeah, no, we have. We haven't actually done an exhibition. We've done exhibitions in Bahrain and Hong Kong and all across Canada. But I don't think we've actually done a full exhibition in the States. We've just loaned to museums in the States.
Do your exhibitions ever travel to other museums and vice versa? Or do you have exhibitions done by other museums come to you? And do you work with museums to create traveling exhibitions?
We haven't worked with the museum to do traveling exhibitions. We've worked with museums to do it, like for them to bring them a traveling exhibition, but not to actually create one together. Have we? I don't think so. Not that I can think of. Um, Sorry, that was a multiple question. So yeah, we send exhibitions to museums. We haven't taken any traveling exhibitions in, but we have borrowed from people. We borrow the Share exhibition right now was borrowed from a private collector. We have borrowed pieces here and there from different museums. One thing that's really great, a really good resource, is lots of little museums have one or two amazing pieces, and they don't even know why they even have them, but they have them. They'll go in the middle of nowhere, and they're like this 18th century dress or this Poiret or this Chanel or something. And if you start pulling these things from the various museums, you can put together an exhibition that would make the Met look like, nothing. I mean, it's amazing the stuff that I know that's in local museums around me that I intend on borrowing at some point. And the Met itself borrows a lot. I mean, now that things are being repatriated, I mean, the galleries are being cleaned out. So there's lots of stuff that major museums are borrowing all the time. So I think that smaller museums consider borrowing from other museums. It's great to use the resources that is out there.
Once again, to thank Jonathan for his time, and thank you all for attending.